All right, for some of you who travel a bit more than I do, something like this might look familiar. What are we looking at? Passport. Yeah. So my question opening off tonight, and I need to apologize. There's been some difficulties the last couple of weeks. It's my mess up with this microphone system. I'm going to try to do better tonight. Gilbert can tell you what it's like to be sitting in Canada last week and watching as my mouth is moving, but no sound is coming out of my mouth. It was wonderful. So my question is, wonder who had more stamps on their passport, Paul or Amos? It's not one to answer, I don't guess, but just to get us thinking about both these individuals were ones who were sent to numerous places to take the Word of God into foreign lands, not just among their own people, but cross borders and go to other places and take a message. So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit tonight as we talk about Amos, that he was from the tribe of Judah, but ultimately he was sent to the Israelites, to the northern tribes. And as far as kind of personality, just some things you kind of pick out if the message he's delivering and the tone and the manner of his speech tells us anything about him. He seems to be a very stern prophet. Maybe you'd say straightforward, a prophet of justice and righteousness. If you've done the reading, and we're only going 3 chapters getting started in the book tonight, how many different countries or places are we told he went and approached with a message? Was it 8? 8 different places? Yeah, so he goes beyond the borders of Judah and Israel to some surrounding nations, what will be referred to in general as the heathen nations, the Gentile nations. So he's going to each one of them, and he has, of course, by revelation of God through the Spirit, he has information about their condition and what kind of life they were living, whether or not they were serving God. And so time after time, it's no, you're not, straightforward. Here's a list of your sins. You've gone above and overboard in your wickedness, and so God's going to bring punishment upon you. And that similar message, just filling in the blank of the name of the nation or the city that represents maybe that nation, fill in that blank, and sometimes it's similar wicked things, sometimes just change some of that listing of things another nation has done. But he has clear insights to the conditions of Israel as well. Of course, that's much closer to home. The northern tribes versus the southern tribes, as we've talked about. But he denounces evils. He warns of doom, just time after time after time, any of these 8 places that he goes. Chapter 1 and verse 2, he says, "The Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The habitations of the shepherds shall mourn. The top of Carmel shall wither." Kind of a blistering, I don't know if this is the introduction he used going to all 8 of these places, or just to kind of get him warmed up and started for the sermon he had, the prophecies for this country, that, or the other. But you just get a tone right off about what's a reference to Carmel here in verse 2. What was Carmel? Anybody remember? A big... Okay, Carmel's a mountain, right? And so there's several stories that are set there throughout the Old Testament, different places. But a very high mountain, sometimes would be even, snow-capped. I mean, that tall of a place for this region and stuff. But his statement, even the tops of the mountains will wither or be gone. When the Lord, represented by Zion, the Mount Zion there, and Jerusalem, represented where God was to be among his people in the temple, that this voice is going to come forth, and here's what's going to happen to all these various different places there. Like Mount Scott for us, for our region, for this. A very real people, real places, real events. Gotcha. Very good. So he gives us some background on the author, Amos, the name, the meaning of his name and some stuff. Native of the city of Tekoa, Small village, 12 miles south of Jerusalem, 6 miles south of Bethlehem. You might have also looked it up if you got maps, or that's kind of interesting to you to get that better set in your mind. If you find that village, Tekoa, so think in your mind Jerusalem dropping down south, 18 miles to the east of Tekoa would be the Dead Sea, to kind of also give that reference, a geographical reference. And it talks about him doing two things as far as his personal work. What were those things? Shepherd, kept a shepherd, and he also sycamore trees. Have we heard about those in the Bible before? I mean, there's a song we sing with little kids, right? We learned out of Luke 19, the first few verses. Zacchaeus, the wee little man, wanted to see Jesus, couldn't because of the stature, the press of the crowd. He climbs up in a sycamore tree. So these trees were noted. They wouldn't grow in the area around Tekoa as high altitude as it was there. They grew in lower regions, particularly head towards the Dead Sea, the lower regions. And so kind of the picture I get, again, reading different references, is maybe something like John in the New Testament, kind of a rugged guy who was out often in the wilderness. That would be similar kind of thing with Amos. To find these trees, or to go and be a keeper of these trees, or get the fruit from these trees, you're going to have to go out to these lower, rugged, wilderness-type places towards the Dead Sea, around in there, to be a grower of sycamore trees. And the sycamore trees was a fruit. It was kind of fig-like in appearance, in taste, but it was a food of the poor. So kind of find that interesting. Again, that's kind of seems to be his upbringing, his background, out in the wilderness, not a lot as far as finances or money or whatever riches he would have himself. But part of what he's going to denounce when he gets to talking to Israel, who is he going to kind of hone in on when he talks his prophecies to Israel? Is he going to be talking about the poor people? The wealthy, right? What kind of references does he make about them? And we're jumping ahead a couple of chapters through the book. He talks about their palaces, their summer houses, their silk, their very cushiony clothing and pillows, bedding, we might say, those kinds of things that he's going to address there, particularly when he comes back to Israel. Let's see. The next paragraph, he's near the end of the reign of Jeroboam, also in the reigns of Uzziah or Azariah, king of Judah, and then Jeroboam II, king of Israel. So this author notes it about the year 760 BC, if you're just, again, kind of trying to track that on a timeline. Younger contemporary of Amos was Hosea, and then also Isaiah, who's even younger, or following along, contemporary but younger of age, following along behind them. So this book of Amos, primarily directed, as we've already said, towards Israel, although his opening words are going to be condemnation of several of the neighboring heathen nations. A central theme, he picks out woe to those who rule out God. And we've talked about this a little bit before, although the Old Testament is focusing on this one nation, the Israelites, God's chosen people for a specific purpose that's going to be carried out through them. Well, these other nations, although we don't have an Exodus chapter 20 or Deuteronomy 5 where God gives commands and laws to the Moabites or the Ammonites or the Edomites or whoever, there had to be something in place, because as he goes through all these nations and talk about how you have forsaken the law of God, you're not doing what he said, you're not pleasing him, you're committing this, and this kinds of sins. I mean, just of necessity, you figure out there had to be some type of law that was given, some expectations for these nations as well. And so those who are ruling out God. Right. Yeah, a lot of interaction, as you said. Good point. So let's pause here for a minute, where we are on this timeline. Go back to the time when God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, 40 years of wandering. They come up and they're going to enter into the land. What are the things God warned them against? Don't do this when you go into the land, right? I'm going to drive them out from before you. You're going to be given the land, but don't do what? I'm sorry, Mom? Don't intermarry. What else? Don't worship their idols. Don't do as they do, right? They were already more evil or evil on down the line because God is going to punish and wipe out those 7 nations and allow the Israelites to come in and take over. But he has said, yeah, don't be like the nations round about you as far as the gods you worship and those kinds of things and setting up high places and altars and all this. Yet what have the Israelites done over time? They've assimilated, done exactly those things, haven't they? He references in here, a couple of paragraphs down, where Amos is quoted twice in the New Testament. I don't know if you look those up or not. The first one's in Acts chapter 7. But tell us who's talking. Acts chapter 7. Last 2 weeks we talked about Jonah's sermon was half of one verse long. Acts 7 is a pretty long speech or sermon, wasn't it? Who was talking there? Stephen. And he goes a lot through the history of the Israelite nation, right, leading up to the present, and he'll make his point at the end. But in Acts 7, those verses, when he references, 42, 43, along in there, what's the point that he's referencing out of Amos? God gave his own people, the Israelites, up to worshiping the hosts of heaven, and then he names a couple of them in particular, the Molech and Baal and some of these. Well, they didn't make them up themselves. It didn't originate with them. They were imitating the nations round about them, doing the very thing God said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And they end up doing that. And it gets to a point finally that God says, give them up to that, I'm going to destroy them, which would come back to our study then. They're getting to that same point. So you just see they've been influenced by the surrounding nations. Is there a warning in that? Again, if we pause here of Amos preaching this back in his day, 760 BC, a takeaway or something we might need to be warned about living in our day and time as a member of the church of God's people? Are there things going on in society round about us that God would not be pleased with? And yet if you live long enough, what eventually happens? Those things begin to creep in, even into the church or among his people, because we're people like anybody else on the face of the planet. But there's the warnings, just Old Testament, time after time, prophet after prophet after prophet come, preaching these things. Stop, don't do it. This is the road you're going down. But the same kinds of things can happen to us if we allow ourselves as a local group of God's people to be influenced by things going on in this community or across the nation, or it could be across the seas, and start allowing false doctrines or things to come into the Lord's body. I just see it as a great warning and something we need to pay attention to as God was sending these prophets to try to get their attention and stop them. Paragraph C talks about the background there. What were the conditions in the nation of Israel, if you want to say economically, as a country? Were they doing all right? Yeah, very much, weren't they? It says it was one of the high points as far as riches and wealth and things going their way, and many other nations were paying taxes or tribute to them as well because of wars that had gone on in the past. So things are looking good. And I just put a note down, in this section in my notes here, kind of the irony, life is great, but their relationship with God was non-existent. If we lose our focus and get wrapped up in material things, riches, how many cars I have, and vacations, and whatever, clothes, whatever would be a measurement of that for you or me or whoever, we might better stop and take stock of our relationship with God. It's not to say you can't profit and can't have a great successful business or own 3 cars or whatever it is, but just Be concerned about what's going on the back end. That was the problem with the Israelites, as he kind of summarized the theme, those who rule God out of their lives. If the Israelites forgot who brought them here, who set them up and gave them, this introduction to the land of Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey, then their spiritual state is not going to be on the same par as their physical or status, their economic status, as things are going here. Okay, any other thoughts you have down to this point, kind of setting the book up? Okay. Okay. That's about as smart as I am on trees, too. But thank you. Yeah. Okay. So that leads us up. The last thing is just going through where he's got outlined the first 3 chapters here. Big title, judgments coming both on these heathen nations, some 6 of those he names, and also the covenant nations, Israel and Judah, will follow as well. So there's a few things I might want to point out going through those verses. But let's go ahead and jump to page 29. Sometimes I don't even get to the questions, and I know people are frustrated. I put in this time and effort and dug out some answers. Why isn't he asking me these questions? Well, here we go. Hey, Gilbert, would you mind taking number 1 to get us started? Okay. So again, unlike some of the earlier, you realize we're already on the 4th minor prophet? You can either look at, wow, we're almost a third of the way through, or some go, we're only a third of the way through. I'm still finding it interesting. I hope you do too. Keep reading, keep digging, and getting some lessons out of this stuff. The 8 nations against which God's destruction was threatened. Just throw this out. Give me one. Or Keith? Arab? All right. Who else? Philistia? We would say Philistines, right? Would be more to our mind. And that one he represented by a city, right? One of their capital or major cities, Gaza. Yeah. Who else was in the list? Edom. We've heard about them before, and here they come again. Israel. Sure. Judah. Moab. What have we not covered? I'm sorry. Gaza, the city of Gaza. Yeah, for Philistia. Sure. Did we say Ammon? Ammonites? Did someone say Tyre yet? Maybe I just missed it. Yeah. Point is, again, if we had the map up there, all these places that are right around, some to the north, south. Philistia was kind of within, the border of Israel itself, but over against the ocean. Just kind of all the people surrounding them. Again, seeing the influence these nations have had on because the Israelites allowed it. I mean, they didn't have to take up their gods and worship Baal and Ashtaroth and these others, but they had done so. Number 3, for what reason did the Lord promise punishment upon Edom? Cruelty to their brethren, wasn't it? Yeah. Pursued them with a sword. Ow. 4, what reason did he promise punishment upon Judah? Despise his law, right? You would think maybe one of these foreign nations, some of these others. But this is against Judah, right? His own people. They have despised my law and are not keeping my commandments. Snoopy? Okay. Could be more than one. I just took it out of verse 1, chapter 1, verse 11. Excuse me. For these reasons I will not turn away the punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword, cast off pities, go on, his anger, he's tearing perpetually, kept his wrath. You expounded on the answer. That's great. That's great. I think we're all looking in the right place. Okay. Number 5, just looking within some of the actual prophecies. Israel had sold the righteous for what? For silver, and the poor for a pair of shoes. So this is going to tell you the mindset that's running through the country, how you treat the poor, right? And again, it's going to be a couple more chapters over before he's specifically going to talk against those with riches, those who had put their trust in these riches and were building or amassing these things. But you kind of see of how a nation treats its poor gives you part of the picture. Like dirt. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they just weren't worth the time of day, right? No, we would never see that. Is it as you read through these things, is your mind a lot of times? Sure. Yeah, read through these prophecies and you think of stories that are going on. The same kinds of mistreatment. Yes. 3. When he gets back, this will be in chapter 2, verses 9 and following, some things God had done because of his love for Israel. They need to be reminded of what had God done for them. Brought them out of Egypt. Somebody was in the way for them to have a place to live. I destroyed the Amorites from before you, cleared them out so that you had a country to go in and possess. Their houses were there, the foods they'd planted, everything was just kind of set and waiting for them. Okay, of their children. Back at a time when they were more faithful to keeping God's word. Now, here's our children devoted to the service of God as Nazarites and other ways. He had led them 40 years through the wilderness and provided for them so that they had food and they had shoes on their feet and clothes on their back, all these things. But now, from 2 and 12, question 7, what had Israel done with those Nazarites and the prophets? Okay. Is it just another level? I mean, not that it's any more wrong to quit. I'm not going to do the commandments of God. But then if you're teaching or persuading or turning your own children or whoever is filling those shoes to go contrary to the law of God. For the Nazarites, yeah, it's okay, drink some wine. For the prophets, no, don't prophesy. That's what you've been trained to do. That's what God told you to do, to go out and carry this word to whoever. But don't prophesy. I mean, we don't want to hear those negative things, those ugly things. To me, that's kind of what would be the word, brazen? Not just that I'm going to slough off and quit doing God's commands, but I'm going to tell others to go contrary to his commands. Right? Yeah, it was a very serious thing, wasn't it? Noted what the conditions of that vow were, and this is how I'm going to live and conduct my life, and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. That's what happens with any sin, is it? When self creeps in above and beyond what God says to do or how he says to do something. I'm going to do what I want. Yes. Question 8. What question did Amos ask to show Israel did not walk with God? We're in chapter 3 now. Can two walk together unless they're in agreement? I mean, rather, a series of questions. He says rhetorical questions. Not that you're waiting for a response, because necessary inference, you can't walk together unless they're in agreement, is the point. And so the point being, Israel's not in agreement with God. His law says this and this and this. You're either not doing it, or you're doing it a different way, your own way, or like the nation around about you have led you off, led you astray. What had they stored up in their palaces? 3 verse 10. Violence and robbery is what you've stored, Well, yeah, you're amassing riches and business is good and all that. Here's how God sees it, what you're storing up, what you value, or, what is of meaning to you. And so, yeah, you may come out with money in the bank, but you're lacking as far as God is concerned. And then what would God do at Bethel when he visited the transgression of Israel? Okay, exactly. All these high places and altars and places you go to sacrifice, not to Jehovah God, but to other gods, I'll tear them down. I'll destroy those altars. All right. Let me keep going. I'll get us off track. Amos was a fisherman by occupation. Not that we know of. There we go. Keeping the sheep and working with those sycamore trees or fruit. Tyrus or Tyre was punished because they remembered not the brotherly covenant. True. 1 verse 9, I believe. Number 3, the Lord was pressed under Israel as a cart full of sheaves is pressed. That's what he's going to do. So there, I've got yes and no, depending on what translation, how it's worded. King James says, I am pressed under, but as he brings out in the workbook, the phrase means I will press you. I'm going to load you down so much, such a heavy load, I can't push the wheelbarrow anymore. I can't carry on. Number 4, only the courageous will stand in the day of the Lord. Fault. Okay, what's the courageous going to do? He'll flee. Even the courageous will flee before the Lord when this time comes. I mean, they're pretty bold at the time Amos is speaking this and by the lives they're living. But with this day of the Lord that's coming, day of punishment, day of rendering, it'll be different. The Lord reveals his secret unto his servants, the prophets. 3:7. Yep, I think that's there. The Lord will do nothing. He revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets. So all these things put together. This oft-used expression now that's found at the beginning for each of these different nations or cities, representative of nations. For 3 transgressions and for 4, the Lord says, I'm going to fill in the blank. What does that phrase mean or suggest? Okay, there we go. Much like Michael starting us on studying Revelation, some things about numbers. It's not that they were only, I remember as a kid going, man, I wonder what the 3 things that nation was doing were that's so bad. Well, there's many more than 3, perhaps. Who knows how many. But yeah, not just are you wicked, you're overabundance of wickedness. The point being, as the author brought at the beginning, Amos talking about God, a God of justice. He's coming in to punish, and it's not because you did one little thing wrong, or you kind of are weak in this area. No, there's a completeness of wickedness. Some of these different terms we've seen, robbery, violence, taking up the sword against your brethren, these different things. God is going to be justified in his punishment because of the wickedness, the extent of wickedness in each of these nations individually. Anything else on that? The 3 strikes. And that's it. The Lord says that's it. Yeah. A pattern of living. Joe? Right. Yes, sir. For the end of time, right? Any other thought? Comment? Good things, thank you. Give me more things to think about. Um, his thought question, application of Amos 3, verse 3 to the condition of the religious world in our time. Back to that, can two walk together unless they're agreed? What is the world in as far as religion? What do they strive for? Or what do they allow for? Well, the same. Okay. You do it your way, I'll do it mine. Unity and diversity, right? Big phrase. Agree to disagree, sure. Well, you're not walking together then, yeah, if we're believing and doing two different things or two different ways of doing something. Bible teaches clear there's one law, God's law, one faith, different passages, different ways he expresses it. And I thought of that based on kind of what Joe was saying. God keeps sending his prophets. One of the statements Jesus would use time and time again in the Gospels, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Yeah, the prophets are here. They're telling you. Well, yeah, I saw that guy Amos was in town. But what did he say? Did you get a message out of that or anything? I don't know. He was just talking. I didn't listen, or I disagreed with him, so I tuned him out, or whatever it might be. All right then, just going back through, we just got a couple minutes, but kind of going back through, just as you read through these chapters or read through them, did you note that, one, there are specifics of each nation's sins and who will defeat them, right? God knows, and so Amos could go into a foreign country, whichever one of these, Syria, Ammon, wherever it might be, and tell you, hey, here's the things y'all are doing wrong, and God's going to destroy you, and here's the nation that's going to come in and do it. So all those specifics, those secrets, kind of back to that statement, God's making them known. Fire, a very common instrument of punishment that's used, throughout each of these. God says, I will send a fire. It will burn down your walls. It will burn down your temples. It will burn down your palaces. Whatever the case might be, which nation he's speaking to. Again, some of the terms that are used: devouring, shouting and tempest. You'll die with a tumult. Just picking out these, these terms that are not like God's just giving a gentle little nudge or something, but very harsh terms. Yes, ma'am. You deserve it. Yeah. Because you're at that point. Yeah, he's trying to get them to see. He had told them long before. Applications. First couple of these are in the book. I always, try to keep thinking, add some on, maybe. Being religious is not enough. He makes the point the what and the why do matter. The details, how God says to do something, as often he says to do it, whatever the point of discussion is. Agreement with God has the effect of obedience. If I'm walking, in agreement with God, then I walk like He says. I'm walking in the light as He is in the light. Otherwise, we're not walking together. God had warned Israel, as we've just been talking about, don't take on the practices of these other nations. And He told them before they ever got into the land of Canaan, if you do that, I'll come on you just as I've come on them, and you'll be removed, and somebody else will take your place. Yeah, right. That's not going to happen, right? And when life is great, check your spiritual condition. You know how we are with God. Really, at all times, that one should come first, regardless of how my life is going. Do I have money in the bank, and some of these niceties we talked about, or that they were amassing kinds of things. And yeah, I went ahead a little bit, but the verse I'm trying to jot it down, take with me out of this book, is from chapter 4. Prepare to meet thy God, O Israel. Again, this isn't a pleasant, nice, hey, I'm getting to go see the king or visit the president or something. This one's with a doom and prophecy of the way you're living is not pleasing God. He's going to bring His armies upon you, so prepare to do battle with Him if that's what you want, because that's what's coming. I'll give you a few seconds to catch your breath. We'll get ready for worship in a moment. Thank you.